Subpar, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is something below a usual or normal level of standard. It's not good nor bad, not even average, it's just, well, subpar. And if you were to ask me to describe the anime adaptation of Ken Wakui's Tokyo Revengers, I would use exactly that word. Subpar. I know what I said may have sounded bad, so before you annoying Tokyo Revengers fans attack me, just know that I do in fact enjoy its story. Sure, it doesn't reach the same time travel peaks as Steins, the same intricacy as the colored gang wars in Durarara, or even the same heartfelt realism it was trying to imitate from Erased. But Tokyo Revengers is interesting enough that it has kept me watching. It's a decent story, a story with a lot of plot holes and leaps in logic, but a good, enjoyable 7 out of 10 story nonetheless. So, if Tokyo Revengers is what I call a subpar adaptation, what would I consider a superb one?
Stop it! You're spoiling it! You're spoiling everything!
Let's take a step back from anime for a moment and look at Hollywood, which is synonymous for making bad adaptations, whether that be books, video games, and remakes. But among the utter pile of garbage, we get gems of adaptations like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, and Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Among these titans of talented people, we have a colossal director that loves to make great adaptations. That is, of course, the one and only Frank Darabont. You may know him as the first season showrunner of Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, the director of many, and by many I mean 3 of Stephen King's novels such as The Green Mile, my personal favorite The Mist, and the film we're going to look at today, the highest rated movie on IMDb, at least of the making of this video, The Shawshank Redemption. So what does The Shawshank Redemption do that makes it a worthwhile adaptation? Well, the answer is fairly simple. A good adaptation improves on its source material. Now let me explain. The novella is loved by many Stephen King fans because he wrote a great story outside of his horror roots. Shawshank isn't even considered to be one of Stephen King's best stories, but its adaptation by Frank Darabont is considered to be the best movie of all time. Why is that? As I see it, adaptations are a second chance at telling the same story. It can cut out fat, fix things that didn't work, and play around to refine the story. Darabont makes a lot of small choices throughout his adaptations that aren't big enough to change the plot, but they do change the way some scenes and themes impact the audience. In the film, after Warden Norton finds out that Tommy has information that could free Andy, the Warden has him killed to keep Andy in prison. Compare this to the novella where Norton simply transfers Tommy to a different prison. Both versions of the story accomplish the same thing. Andy's last hope of getting out of prison and his sort of surrogate son are both taken away from him, sending the story to its darkest hour. But the movie does a far better job in doing this, as it shows us firsthand how far Warden Norton is willing to go to achieve his maniacal goal. Changes like these are what makes the adaptation of The Shawshank Redemption loved and the reason why it's the highest rated movie on IMDb, because it improves on its source material. Now, Hollywood is different from the anime industry. While in Hollywood we're lucky to get at least one good adaptation per year, each anime season pumps out adaptations of manga that at the very least don't butcher its source materials. That's why in this era, anime like Tokyo Revengers can't be doing the bare minimum. If it wants to stand out, it has to be better or at the very least be around the same quality as the manga it's based on. Demon Slayer is loved by many because of its great adaptation. The manga is great and all, but its story is very unoriginal. But even with that disadvantage, its adaptation is beloved by many. Just look at the ratings on Mel. The Demon Slayer anime has an 8.59 while its manga has a mere 8.28. And this goes for Tokyo Revengers as well, except the other way around, with the manga being more beloved.
Actually, that's not a fair comparison because Demon Slayer has been out for a year and Tokyo Revengers is still fairly new.
Okay, fine, that's a fair point. So I'll compare it to something that came out in the same season. To Your Eternity came out in the same season as Tokyo Revengers, and even though it came out a week later, we can tell from To Your Eternity's ratings that it is loved. And why? Because it made fucking improvements. In the manga, the fan favorite Perona is killed off screen, and we learn this information as Hayase shares it with Fushi, and in turn, us. But they have figured out that we have grown attached to Perona, so, in the anime, when Hayase tells Fushi that she killed her, we are shown Perona being tortured and decapitated by the ruthless Hayase. By having us see this young woman's life be taken by Hayase, it makes us sympathize with Fushi and adds fuel to the fire that is our hatred towards this antagonist.
But Tokyo Revengers is already a masterpiece. It doesn't need any improvements.
Well, that whole mentality is wrong, because you can always do something to improve. Whether that be yourself, a skill, or in this case, a story.
Ooh. Sheesh.
So what makes Tokyo Revengers subpar? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to compare Tokyo Revengers to another anime about using time travel to save a girl. I touched upon this earlier in the video, and of course, I'm talking about the masterpiece that is Erased. And to compare them fairly, I will use scenes from episode 1 of their respective series, where both Satoru and Takemichi's lives are turned upside down and are thrown into the past. We start with Satoru getting home from work, and as he walks up the stairs to his apartment complex, he passes by a man in a suit. And we know by the way that Satoru looks at him that our protagonist is suspicious of this man. This scene also subconsciously warns us to not trust the guy in the suit, a great foreshadowing for what's to come. Then what follows is a beat-by-beat adaptation from the manga, with Satoru finding the door open and finding his mom's lifeless body on this floor, with a few key changes. In the manga, Satoru never runs into the killer on his way home. He uses his ability to go back in time to save his mom, only to find out that it's way too late for that. He picks up the piece of paper his mom had and goes outside to look for the killer, spotting him and chasing him into the bush, with a neighbor calling the police because Satoru was acting suspicious. Satoru loses the killer and runs into a police officer, and with his hands covered in blood, he runs away, knowing that the killer has set him up to become the primary suspect of his mom's murder. He runs into an alleyway and begs fate to give him one more chance before sending him back into the past. In the anime, Satoru never uses his revival to try and save his mom because, in this version, he cannot control that power. This also allows the adaptation to cut fat because the only reason why Satoru went back in time in the manga was so he can find the piece of paper and for him to become a suspect. Those things don't necessarily need a revival to happen. This change also holds back on the revival ability, so when it is used later on, it becomes more impactful and satisfying. The anime simply has Satoru pick up the piece of paper by the door, thinking his mom is messing up the place, which enhances the claim that he is irritated by his mom being there. And Satoru being a prime suspect is even a stronger claim here because one of his neighbors sees him beside his mother's dead body, covered in her blood. This has alarm bells going through our heads because now there is a prime witness that saw Satoru at the crime scene. Then the cops show up, which is confusing at first until we learn later on that the killer knows Satoru's work schedule. And by connecting the dots, we can figure out that the killer murdered Satoru's mom and called the cops in a way that would make Satoru the prime suspect. This shows how well prepared and cunning and maniacal our protagonist's foe is. When the police confront Satoru, he runs away because he understands the situation. He understands that he's screwed. We get a shot of the blue butterfly from earlier in this episode that lets us know that a revival is about to happen soon. And by holding back on the revival that was supposed to happen earlier, it makes this revival feel even more significant, which we'll see, it pretty much is. As Satoru runs, we get this moving crane shot that zooms in on him, which I love. Erased is a drama thriller that doesn't need these crazy camera movements to keep the viewer's attention. But by going the extra mile, this shows how adamant and dedicated the people working behind this adaptation are. The screen fades to black in a way reminiscent of a blink. We know that a revival has happened, but we also have a feeling that this isn't a normal revival. The two other times Satoru has a revival in this episode is signaled with a loud noise and the screen's colors inverting, which honestly scared me when I first watched it. But by having the transitions be different from what happened before breaks the pattern because this isn't the 5-minute leaps back in time we're used to. The blink transition brings us into a moving first-person POV shot in an anime? Holy shit, the amount of work put into this is just insane. Satoru walks past a red postbox, and if you have watched Mother Basement's Erased videos, you know that red in this show means danger. This red postbox being set beside a road symbolizes the dangerous path our protagonist has to trek through to reach his goal. Also take note that we are shorter than the postbox, and with Satoru established to be fairly tall, we know that something is not right. It's as if Satoru has become shorter. One of Satoru's friends, Kazu, taps him on the shoulder, telling him he's gonna be late. And that gives us a question that keeps us interested. What is Satoru gonna be late for? The POV shakes as Kazu taps him, which is a neat little detail. Out of Satoru's friend group, Kazu is the one who we run into first, which is a great pick. Kazu, out of the friend group, is wearing the most childlike and brightest color, yellow. This pulls us into the narrative even more and gives us another subtle hint that Satoru has turned into a child. The first person long take ends when Satoru arrives at school. We get an extreme close-up of Satoru's pupil shrinking, which indicates that the pieces have finally come together for him. He realizes that he is now a kid again. This also took him longer to figure out, which, again, is another subtle hint that he's not too keen in putting obvious pieces together. We zoom away into a bird's eye shot as Satoru shrinks, symbolizing how he has turned into a powerless child. We are looking down on him. Then we don't cut away from the school, but instead it pans around it in one take? I mean, they could have easily edited it like this. But they went the extra mile and the outcome is impressive. This level of detail is what erases my second favorite piece of fiction. It takes a great source material and makes creative and smart decisions when adapting it. Sure, it may have stumbled a bit towards the end when they had to cut out an entire volume's worth of content, but even then they did it in a way that doesn't betray its fans. Well, sort of. I was satisfied with its realistic outcome, so I'll let you guys decide on that one. This is the mark of a great adaptation, unlike the mess that is. We start at the beginning of the episode, with Takemichi watching TV and learning about the weather? It hasn't even been 10 minutes and there's already something wrong with this adaptation. The stuff about the weather continues for 30 agonizing seconds. This is the beginning of the story, which is supposed to hook us. The weather is not a good hook into the story. And I'd forgive it if the weather actually plays an important role, but it doesn't. It doesn't even match the mood of what's to come. The weather is sunny and bright, which symbolizes happiness and fun. The later stuff in the episode is not happy or fun. And if you say that it's bright so the dark stuff hits harder, then you are wrong. Takemichi's life is shit right now. Nothing about that is bright, so this doesn't even work as a contrast. So this entire first 30 seconds is pointless and just wastes valuable time. Erased is smart with what it puts on screen because it uses every single frame and second to push either its plot, story, or characters forward. Already Tokyo Revengers feels like it's just adding unnecessary filler to pad out the runtime, which it does a lot later on. And the crazy thing is it hasn't even been 30 seconds in the episode. It takes 30 fucking seconds until we finally find out that Takemichi's ex-girlfriend from middle school and her brother have been murdered by Tomon. That's way too long. In the manga, the story begins with Takemichi finding out. That is the hook. Instantly we're hit with the news that our main character's ex and her brother have died, introducing us to 3 of its main players. And we're in the same headspace as Takemichi because he barely remembers them, so we can relate because we don't know them either. We don't need to know about the weather because that stuff doesn't add anything to the story, it just distracts us from the important stuff. I just realized I'm gonna be pissing off this Discord chat. I feel like the only reason why they had the news talk about the weather is so that we can listen to something as we see how terrible Takemichi's place is. But I would have rather preferred us to be dropped right into the middle of the story rather than wasting valuable runtime on useless weather. Takemichi's landlady complains about his TV being too loud and this scene is fine. It doesn't detract or add anything, which makes it just okay. We arrive at Takemichi's workplace where we are met with another small problem. In the manga, Takemichi is framed smaller than his coworker, which hammers in the fact that he has hit rock bottom. The way it is framed is genius, because he's not the one in control. It's his coworker. In the anime, he's framed to be the same. Actually, no, he's taller than his coworker. What the fuck is this? After his work, Takemichi keys someone's car because he's irritated that his life has turned out to be this miserable. They changed this in the anime and I actually do like this change. In the anime, 3 kids hang out by the car, pushing Takemichi around before keying said car and placing the blame on our hero. That's a great way to encapsulate his shrunken personality. Takemichi has turned out to be so pathetic that kids can mess around with him and get away with it. I love that. I also love the framing of the scene. Even though we have a lot of space on the left, Takemichi is pushed so far to the right almost as if he was being cornered by these kids. And having the kids mess around with him is a great foreshadowing for what's to come later on in the episode, when we find out that he used to be like these delinquents. So this change is actually pretty solid, I approve. Next, we find ourselves at the train station with Takemichi criticizing himself. Takemichi's feet are over the yellow line, foreshadowing what's to come as a mysterious figure pushes him into an oncoming train. We see Takemichi's life flashes before his eyes until we are suddenly on a different train. This is a straight beat-for-beat copy from the manga, except for one massive flaw. They took a page out of Erased and inverted the screen's colors. This scene is written in a way that makes it seem like Takemichi's life is flashing before his eyes, something that normally happens when one is in the face of death. But we know that this isn't normal because the screen inverted colors and that isn't normal. We can't relate to Takemichi's confused mind because of this. In the manga, this was a simple heartbeat, which doesn't say much. This also detracts from the plot twist at the end of the episode because we already know that something was off. Next, we meet Takemichi's friend group and learn about their personalities through fucking exposition, just great. I can forgive the manga for doing this. It has a limited page count and it has to be serialized weekly, so of course the author is going to try to fit as much information into a panel. Instead of having Takemichi tell us what his friends are like, it should be shown to us firsthand. And they miss an opportunity because instead of going straight to the fight like in the manga, in this version they stop by a fast food restaurant to grab something to eat. Hanging out after school is a great way to show that they are friends, but instead of using this scene to develop these characters properly, we get
しか渋谷さん中でバン張ってるって言ってたような。
渋谷山中の2年対俺ら溝中2年で戦争だ
more fucking exposition. In the manga, they talk about this information while they're waiting for the other school. But having them talk about this at the restaurant completely ruins this otherwise pretty good addition. Why change the scene if you're gonna do the same thing that was gonna happen in the next scene? They could have used the scene to develop these characters as friends, and let me give you an example. Yamagishi is the dumbest friend in the group, but he wears glasses to look smart. That is a creative character trait. But instead of Takemichi telling us this information, we could have had a scene at the restaurant where he says or does something stupid, which they laugh, cementing these guys as a proper friend group. Then one of them can grab his glasses and can tell him wearing glasses isn't gonna do anything to make him smarter. This example is more natural and engaging than the spoon-fed way we were fed this information. I could keep going on about the missed opportunities and changes that worsen the story of Tokyo Revengers, but we'd be here all day. Sure, they may not be big on their own, but if it keeps happening, which it does later, it's going to become a big problem as the series continues. A great adaptation improves at everything, whether that be the way information is given, the structure and pacing, the framing of a scene, even down to the insignificant details. And if Tokyo Revengers wants to make an impact on the anime community the way time travel giants such as Steins Gate, ReZero, and Erased have, it's going to have to step up its game. If this subpar adaptation is content with adapting and not trying to give us something more, then this adaptation is gonna have to stay just that. Subpar.
Yeah.